My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 40 years old. For almost 15 years, my family believed I was the quiet daughter who worked behind the scenes at a courthouse. The one who never made much money. The one who never married. The one who had somehow never become anything important. They were wrong about almost everything. And I learned just how wrong they were on a Saturday morning in October, when my mother put both hands on my shoulders and asked me to confess to a crime my sister had committed. A man was lying in a hospital bed with serious injuries. My sister had been driving my SUV, and my parents had already decided who was going to take the blame. Me. My father sat at the kitchen table and explained it like he was solving a business problem. My sister had a political campaign. I had no husband, no children, no public reputation in town, and, according to them, no future worth protecting. My father looked directly at me and said, "Claire, you have less to lose." My sister didn't even look up from her phone. She just smiled. Then she asked the question that told me exactly how little they thought of me. Who would believe you? There was a lawyer sitting at the kitchen island before anyone had even asked me what happened. And sitting beside him was a typed statement. A confession. My confession. They had already written the story. They just needed my signature. What they didn't know was that I had spent the last 15 years learning exactly how people build stories that aren't true. They didn't know what my real job was. They didn't know what my vehicle had recorded that night, and they certainly didn't know there was another person who had seen my sister come home after the accident. What happened over the next several weeks didn't just expose what my sister had done. It exposed what my entire family believed I was worth. And by the time it was over, there wasn't much of that family left. So let me take you back to the beginning. Because the night this happened started with something completely ordinary. A birthday invitation. My niece Lily was 13. She sent me a text almost a month before the family gathering. "Grandpa's birthday is Saturday. Please come." There was a little heart at the end. That was it. I hadn't been home in nearly 3 years, but that little heart was enough to make me drive almost 6 hours back to the town where I grew up. I should have known something was wrong when I pulled into the driveway. The house looked exactly the same. White columns. Fresh flowers. The expensive campaign sign my father had refused to remove. My sister's name was printed across it in bold letters. She was running for state office. Of course she was. Inside the front door was the same wooden bowl my mother had kept there since I was a child. Everyone put their car keys inside. She used to call it a family tradition. I always thought of it as inventory. I dropped my keys into the bowl. Nobody said anything. In the living room, there was a wall covered with family photographs. I counted 9 pictures with me in them. The newest one was from 15 years earlier. After that, nothing. The photographs continued. My sister's college graduation, my sister's campaign launch, my niece's birthday, my parents' anniversary, Christmases, Thanksgivings, everything. Just not me. Nobody had ever announced that I was no longer part of the family. They didn't have to. They simply stopped putting me in the picture. And after enough years, you stop asking why. My father introduced me to a local businessman that evening. "This is my oldest daughter," he said. Then he paused. "She works with court records." That was how he described me. Not a lawyer, not a judge, not anything that mattered. Just someone who worked with paperwork. I smiled, shook the man's hand, and let it go. Because I'd spent years letting things go. Being invisible had become almost automatic. By 11 that night, most of the guests were gone. My sister Megan was still drinking. She had always been the daughter who knew where the cameras were, even when there wasn't a camera. She was preparing for a campaign event the next morning, and someone mentioned that the campaign signs were still stored in the barn. My mother said they could wait until morning. Megan disagreed. A volunteer was coming early. She didn't want anything looking messy. That word stuck with me. Messy. I said goodnight and went upstairs. My old bedroom was still there. The same narrow bed, the same closet, my mother's winter coats hanging where my clothes used to be. I read for a while. Then I heard the front door. The keys rattled in the wooden bowl. Then the garage door opened. It was around midnight. A few seconds later, I heard two people talking quietly downstairs. They weren't arguing. They sounded calm, almost organized, like they were planning something. I fell asleep. Sometime after 1 in the morning, I went downstairs for water. The wooden bowl was empty. Every key was gone. There were 4 vehicles in the driveway. I remember thinking that was strange. Then I went back upstairs, and I forgot about it. For 2 days. I wish I hadn't, because the next morning, the local news was on while I was making coffee. A man had been hit on Route 16 just before midnight. He had been riding his bicycle home. He was 62 years old. He was in critical condition. The vehicle that hit him was believed to be a dark SUV. The police had part of the license plate. I stopped moving. The coffee was still running. Then I looked toward the hallway. My father had been in his office since early morning. The door was closed. My sister hadn't come downstairs. My mother said Megan had a headache. Then I walked outside, and I saw my SUV. It wasn't parked where I had left it. The front was facing the opposite direction, and the right headlight was cracked. There was a pale scrape across the bumper, but the strangest part was how clean it was. Someone had wiped it down. I stood there with my hand on the hood. My mother walked up behind me. She didn't ask what I was looking at. She simply said, "Claire, come inside." Then she paused. "We need to have a family conversation." When I walked back into the kitchen, my father's attorney was already sitting at the island. And that was when I knew. This wasn't going to be a family conversation. It was a plan. The lawyer's name was Martin Cole. He had known my father for more than 20 years. He had taught me how to fish when I was a kid. He had been at family holidays. He had watched me grow up. And now he was sitting at the kitchen island with a legal pad in front of him. There was coffee beside his hand. He looked completely comfortable. That was the first thing that bothered me. They hadn't called him after speaking to me. They had called him before. They had already decided what this conversation was going to be. My father walked into the kitchen. He didn't say good morning. Neither did my mother. Martin started talking. Not about the injured man. Not about whether he was going to survive. Not about his wife. Not about his family. They talked about exposure. They talked about the next 72 hours. They talked about the campaign. And then Martin used a phrase I will never forget. Controlled outcome. He said it twice. I sat there and listened. Piece by piece, the truth came out. My sister had taken my keys shortly before midnight. She had taken my SUV. She had been drinking. She had come back with a damaged headlight. And instead of calling the police or an ambulance, my mother had made her tea. Nobody went back to the accident scene. Nobody called 911. A truck driver eventually found the injured man. He had been lying beside his bicycle for almost 20 minutes. Then Martin pushed a sheet of paper across the counter. It already had my name on it. It was dated, typed, organized, ready to sign. I read it once. Then again. It said I had taken my own SUV. It said I had been driving on an unfamiliar road. It said I had panicked after hitting someone. It said I left the scene because I was scared. I looked at my mother. She came around the counter. She put both hands on my shoulders. Her voice became soft, almost loving. "Just say you were driving." I asked her if she understood what she was asking. She said yes. Then she explained why it had to be me. My sister had a political future. I didn't. My sister had a reputation. I didn't. My sister had a campaign. I had a job nobody in that town knew anything about. My father sat there with his glasses pushed up on his forehead. Then he said the sentence that explained everything. "Megan has an election coming." He looked at me. "You don't have anything to lose." I stared at him. For years, I had wondered why my family never seemed interested in my life. Now I understood. They weren't ignoring me. They had already assigned me a value, and it was very low. My sister walked into the kitchen. She was wearing sweatpants and a sweatshirt, no makeup. She poured herself orange juice. I told them no. Nobody moved. I said it again. No. Martin asked everyone to calm down. My father said there wasn't time for that. Then my sister leaned against the counter. She looked at me. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. She looked amused. Who would believe you? I picked up my coat. I started walking toward the door. Then my father spoke. Megan already gave a statement. I stopped. He continued. Your name is in it. I turned around. Martin wouldn't look at me. That told me enough. My sister had told the police that I had been visiting from out of town. She said I had asked about the highway. She said I had left the house around midnight. She had made it sound casual, helpful, not like an accusation. That was what made it dangerous. The car was registered to me. A witness had seen a dark SUV. My sister had already given police a story, and I had been sleeping alone. My family thought that made me easy to blame, but they had made one mistake. They had no idea what I actually did for a living. When I was 25, I failed the bar exam. That was the story my family kept. My father was running for re-election at the time. He needed to look successful. So at a campaign dinner, he told a room full of supporters that his oldest daughter had gone to law school and washed out. People laughed. He laughed too. My mother stood beside him. Later, I asked her why she let him do that. She fixed my collar. Then she said, "We don't really have truths in this family." She smiled. "We have versions." I passed the bar several months later. I never told them. I moved away. I became a public defender. I spent years representing people who had nobody else. Then, eventually, I became a federal judge. My family never knew. I didn't tell them. At some point, silence had become easier than correcting them. I told myself that privacy was strength. Maybe it was. Or maybe I had simply become very good at disappearing. But a man lying injured on Route 16 was about to make disappearing impossible. By Sunday, the state police had taken over the investigation, and my family started getting nervous. Martin returned with another version of my statement. This one was cleaner. The word panicked had been removed. Now I had supposedly become confused. He said there was no rush. Then he gave me a deadline. I went outside. I called an old attorney friend named Elena Ruiz. I'd met her years earlier in court. I told her everything. She asked me 2 questions. Had I spoken to the police? No. Had I touched the vehicle? Only the hood. She told me not to touch it again. Then she said something else. Do not be alone with your family. I looked across the driveway at my SUV. There was something inside that car they didn't know about. Something that could remember the night. The car had been recording. Modern vehicles remember more than people realize. They track driver profiles. They connect to phones. And after serious impacts, some vehicles preserve crash information. My SUV was one of them. I knew that. My family didn't. On Monday morning, I sat in the passenger seat. I didn't remove anything. I didn't download anything. I barely touched the screen. I was only looking. The driver profile was different. The seat was several inches forward from my normal position. Then I checked the connected devices. One phone stood out. My sister's. Her phone had connected shortly after 11:30 that night, then disconnected less than half an hour later. I stared at the screen. That was the first moment. I knew the story my family was telling couldn't possibly be the whole story. But I also knew something else. I couldn't just pull the data out myself. If I did, the defense could question how I handled it. They could argue it had been altered. They could question when I accessed it. They could question what I saw before the police did. I had spent too many years in courtrooms not to understand that. So I left it alone. That was probably the hardest thing I did during the entire ordeal. Because I knew the truth might be sitting right there, and I couldn't touch it. Later that morning, Martin casually mentioned that my family could have the damaged headlight repaired. A shop was supposedly ready to take the SUV. I thanked him. Then I went upstairs and called my insurance company. I told them the vehicle may have been involved in an accident while another person was driving it. I told them the circumstances were disputed, and I asked them to preserve the vehicle exactly as it was. The insurance company opened a claim. A preservation hold was placed on the SUV. The repair was stopped. Nobody could replace the headlight. Nobody could clean the interior. Nobody could move the seat. Nobody could erase anything. It was a very ordinary phone call, but it changed everything. My father found out later. He didn't mention it at dinner. He simply looked at me a little longer than usual. I've spent years watching people change their behavior when new information reaches them. I saw it happen on his face. For the first time, he was wondering whether the daughter he had written off years ago was actually someone he didn't understand. He didn't ask. My mother kept passing food around the table. Nobody talked about the SUV. Nobody talked about the injured man. The silence was almost impressive. On Wednesday, I went to the hospital. I didn't tell anyone who I was. I sat in the corner of the surgical waiting room. The injured man's wife was there. Her name was Susan. She had a small bag beside her. Inside was a crossword book. She never opened it. A nurse came out and spoke with her. Susan kept talking about her husband, not the accident. Him? She said he had worked at the same diner for almost 30 years. She said he could handle a packed lunch shift without making a mistake. She said their old truck needed a transmission. They had been saving for it. Her husband had decided to ride his bicycle for another few months instead. She said he always wore his helmet. She said it twice. I sat there listening. Then I looked at the bulletin board near the coffee machine. There was a campaign flyer. My sister's face was on it. She was smiling. Under her picture were words about accountability and trust. I stared at the flyer. Then I bought Susan a coffee. She didn't know who I was. I left before she could ask. The next morning, I went to see Martin. Part of me still hoped there was a decent man underneath all of this. I wanted to believe he'd gotten trapped. Maybe he was afraid of my father. Maybe he didn't know the whole story. His office was above an old pharmacy. There was a photograph on his wall from a fishing trip years ago. I was in it. I was 11. My father was there. Martin was there. I was holding a fish. He poured me coffee. Then I told him everything. The keys, the seat, the phone, the timeline, the damaged headlight, the confession. He listened quietly. When I finished, he looked at me. Then he said, "Claire, sign the statement." He said it like he was helping me. He explained that I might receive a reduced sentence, no prison, probation, a plea deal. He called it the solution that would save everyone. Then I noticed the paperwork on his desk. The county attorney's office. The name on it belonged to a man who had worked closely with my father for decades. Suddenly I understood. This wasn't just a family problem. The people who would decide what happened were connected to the people trying to blame me. I left the office. That afternoon, Alina met me at the motel. She explained the situation clearly. The evidence had to be collected properly. The county attorney had a political relationship with my family. And I had one more problem. My own position. Because I hadn't told anyone that I was a federal judge. That meant I couldn't use my position to push the investigation. I couldn't call someone and say who I was. I couldn't pressure anyone. I couldn't ask for special treatment. I had to face this like an ordinary citizen. Alina looked at me and said, "Eventually, this case is going to need your testimony." I understood what she meant. For 15 years, I had kept myself out of the family photographs. Now the one thing that could save me was the same thing I had spent my life hiding. My face? The next step was preserving the evidence. Alina arranged for a forensic technician to examine the SUV. Her name was Maya Patel. She came with her own equipment, her own forms, and a camera. Everything was documented. The location, the time, the vehicle identification number, the mileage, the damage, the driver's seat, the headlight, the phone connections. Every step was recorded before anyone touched anything. That mattered, because evidence isn't only about what you find, it's about how you find it. Maya eventually removed the relevant vehicle module and storage component. Then she placed them in my hand for a moment. It was strange. Something so small could carry so much. I was holding the record of that night, but I hadn't seen it. Maya asked if I wanted to review the information before she sealed it. I said no. Alina looked at me. I explained why. If I watched the evidence first, someone could later ask whether my testimony had been influenced by what I saw. I wanted to tell the truth based only on what I personally remembered. I didn't want my memory mixed with information from the vehicle. So Maya sealed everything. She signed the evidence back, dated it. Alina signed it. The evidence went into a locked case. I still didn't know exactly what was inside. I only knew the car had remembered something, and that was enough. But while all of this was happening, my family was trying another strategy. My mother invited everyone to dinner, not a family meeting. Dinner? The good plates came out. My favorite meal was served. The kind of food I hadn't eaten in that house for years. My niece was allowed to stay at the table. My father asked about my life. My sister complimented my hair. For one strange hour, it felt like I had returned to the family I remembered. And that was the point. After my niece went upstairs, my mother put her hand on the table. She said the county attorney had been contacted. There could be a deal. Reduced charges. No prison. Community service. The whole thing could disappear after a period of time. Then she looked at me. And you can come home. I didn't understand at first. She explained. Family dinners, birthdays, holidays, my niece's future milestones. My picture would go back on the wall. I could finally be part of the family again. The price, I had to take responsibility for the accident. A man would spend months recovering. My sister would keep her political career, and I would carry a criminal conviction. I sat there listening, and the terrible part was this. I wanted the family. I really did. For one brief moment, I wanted to say yes. I wanted my picture back on that wall. I wanted to stop being the daughter who lived somewhere else. But then I thought about the man in the hospital. I thought about his wife, and I realized something. My family knew exactly what I wanted. They had spent 15 years watching me want it. That was why the offer was so effective. They weren't offering me money. They were offering me belonging. And they wanted me to pay for it with my name. A few days later, the injured man finally woke up. He survived surgery. Doctors were working to get him standing again. I saw him through the hospital hallway. 2 therapists helped him use a walker. It took him several minutes to cross a short distance. When he finally sat down, he made a joke. The therapists laughed. His wife covered her mouth. I watched them, and I thought about my father's words. You have nothing to lose. Maybe that was true. But that man had lost something. His ability to work normally. His freedom. His savings. His health. His ordinary life. And my sister was on television, talking about how deeply her family cared. About the victim. She was standing outside the county building. Perfect hair. Perfect clothes. Perfect voice. She talked about accountability. I almost laughed. The press conference wasn't really a defense. It was image control. A few days later, a newspaper article appeared. It didn't say my name directly. It didn't have to. It described an estranged sister. Someone who lived out of state. Someone who had supposedly been struggling. 3 small facts, all technically true. Put together, they became a completely different person. Me? That evening, my niece texted, "Did you really do it?" I stared at the message for a long time. I wanted to tell her everything. But I didn't. I wrote, "No, I promise I'll explain everything when this is over." Then I put the phone down. Because I wanted her to hear the truth when I could prove it, not as another family version. I drove home for one day. It was the loneliest day of the entire ordeal. I met with the ethics officer responsible for my judicial conduct. I told him everything. He gave me rules. No public statements. No contact with officials in my judicial capacity. No using my position. No calling reporters. No pressure. He looked at me and said, "In practice, you may have fewer options than an ordinary person." I told him I understood. Before leaving, I stood alone in my chambers. My judicial robe hung behind the door. I looked at it for a long time. That robe represented something my family never knew about, but I couldn't use it to save myself. I had to face this as an ordinary citizen, which, strangely enough, was the role my family had trained me to play for years. I returned to the county, and I still refused to sign. The next day, my family changed their story again. My father said the family had never claimed my sister was driving. That wasn't true. Then Martin sent another letter. It said that if necessary, the family would explain that I had knowingly allowed my sister to use my vehicle after she had been drinking. They had found another way to keep my name inside the case. If I wouldn't be the driver, I could become the person who gave her the keys. Either way, I would still be responsible. That afternoon, the detective called. She asked me to come to the state police office. She told me to bring my attorney. I understood what that meant. I was no longer just a witness in their minds. I had officially become part of the investigation. The police station was a plain brick building, a flag outside, a vending machine inside. Alina met me in the parking lot. Detective Laura Pierce was waiting. She was in her 40s, calm, direct, the kind of person who had spent years listening to people lie. She told us something I didn't expect. The police had already obtained a warrant for the vehicle's telematics. They had gone directly to the manufacturer. They had obtained the company's copy of the crash information. They didn't need anything I had touched. That was important. The evidence was coming from another direction. Then she gave us the second piece. My sister's statement had a problem. She had said the house was quiet after 11, but a neighbor's doorbell camera had captured my SUV, leaving the driveway shortly before midnight and returning less than half an hour later, exactly when my sister claimed she was upstairs. The detective asked me to describe my night. I did. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't add emotion. I didn't guess. I told her about the keys, the stairs, the bedroom, the garage, the voices, the empty bowl, the water, everything I knew, nothing more. Detective Pierce listened. Then she closed her folder. She looked at me. One more question. I waited. Occupation? I answered honestly. United States District Judge. The room became very quiet. Alina looked down. The detective didn't speak for several seconds. Then she wrote it down. She asked which district. I told her. She asked why it wasn't already in the file. I said, because nobody asked. She nodded. Then she stood. At the door, she shook my hand. Thank you for coming in, Your Honor. My mother was sitting in the lobby. She had apparently come to see what was happening. She heard everything. I watched her face change. It wasn't pride. It wasn't happiness. It was calculation. She had just learned that the daughter she thought had nothing was a federal judge. She had spent 15 years thinking I was the family failure. Now she was realizing I was probably the most powerful person in the room. She didn't ask. I walked outside. Alina asked if I was okay. I looked at my keys. Then I said, who would believe me anyway? She smiled. Let's find out. The news reached my father quickly. He called me that evening. He wanted me to come to the house. I agreed to meet him outside. He sat in a chair on the porch. I expected anger. Instead, he was excited. He thought my position could actually help the family. He started talking about how a federal judge accepting responsibility would look honorable. He said voters would respect it. He said my sister could turn the scandal into a story about accountability. He said my father could support me. He kept talking, and I realized something terrible. He wasn't proud of me. He was calculating what I was worth. He had spent an hour turning my judicial position into a political asset. He had found a way to use my success to protect the same people who had tried to destroy me. I let him finish. Then I stopped hoping, not because of the confession, not because of the newspaper, not even because of the false statement, because my father had finally shown me exactly how he saw me. A useful name, a useful title, a useful daughter, nothing more. That week, the county attorney announced that no charges would be filed yet because there wasn't enough evidence to identify the driver. Then my family's attorney sent another statement. 4 family members were willing to say that I had knowingly given my sister the vehicle, my father, my mother, my sister, and another relative who hadn't even been awake when it happened. 4 against 1. Alina explained what that meant. The police might have strong evidence, but the county attorney had political ties to my family. We needed something public, something official, something impossible to quietly bury. She looked at me. There is one door left. I asked what door. She said, your testimony. And that was when I understood. The entire case had been moving toward one moment. The moment when I would have to stop being invisible. The moment when I would have to stand in public and tell the truth. Even if my family disappeared afterward. That night, I asked myself a question. If telling the truth meant losing your entire family, would you still tell it? Not for a week, not until Christmas, forever. Would you? I didn't know the answer yet. Then my sister came to the motel. She arrived on Sunday night. No campaign staff, no lawyer, no phone in her hand. Just an old sweatshirt and jeans. I'd never seen my sister without a phone nearby. She sat across from me. For several minutes, she didn't speak. Then she started talking about childhood. She talked about being 16, about our father taking her to political events, about learning to smile for photographs, about how every mistake she made felt like a disaster because our father expected her to succeed. She told me that once she received a bad grade and our father didn't speak to her for days. She said it like it was normal. Then she looked at me. Do you know what it's like to be the family's only investment? I did. Just from the other side. But she never apologized. Not once. She didn't ask how the injured man was doing. She didn't ask about his wife. She didn't ask whether he would walk normally again. She talked about herself. Then she made the offer. Take the plea. She said I could survive it. She said I had always been the strong one. She said I had already spent years being the family's disappointment. I can't lose this, she said. For a moment, I saw the sister I might have had. The sister who might have sat beside me when we were younger. The sister who might have protected me. Then she stood. She walked toward the door. Before leaving, she looked at herself in the window. She fixed her hair, and I watched the campaign version of her return. The sister was gone. The candidate was back. 3 days later, we had a meeting. Everyone came. My father, my mother, my sister, the lawyer, another relative, and me. A folder was sitting on the table. Inside was another version of my confession. They had rewritten it again. Beside the folder was a black pen. The cap was already off. I remember staring at that pen. It was waiting for me. Like everyone had already decided what my hand would do. I picked it up. I held it for a second. Then I placed it back down. I pushed it away. No, nobody raised their voice. Nobody needed to. My attorney opened her briefcase. She told them what had already happened that morning. We had filed a sworn statement with the state attorney general. My complete account. The timeline, the keys, the vehicle, the seat position, the connected phone, the garage, the conversations, the prepared confession, everything. We had also filed a request for an independent prosecutor because the local prosecutor had a long political relationship with my father, and the forensic evidence had been properly preserved. The vehicle evidence was already with law enforcement. The manufacturer's data had been obtained independently. There was no longer one piece of evidence. There were multiple pieces. My father said my name. My mother said it too. I didn't turn around. I walked out. That night, someone slipped an envelope underneath my motel door. There was no stamp, no name. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother's. Inside was a photograph. I was 7 years old. I was standing on the front steps wearing a red coat. I was holding a cat. On the back, my mother had written, "Kitchen, tomorrow, 9 a.m., come alone." I almost threw it away. Instead, I went. The next morning, I sat at the same kitchen island. Same chair, same house, same coffee. My mother sat across from me. Then she told me something she had never admitted. She had been awake the night of the accident. She hadn't been asleep. She had heard the garage door. She had gone into the kitchen. She had seen my sister. She had seen the damage on my SUV. She knew. She had known almost immediately. She had taken every set of keys from the bowl, not to protect anyone from driving, to make sure nobody could later say which vehicle had been where. She had wiped the garage door frame. She had poured the lawyer coffee. She had helped build the story. And when she looked me in the eyes that morning and asked me to confess, she already knew the truth. I asked her why she was telling me now. She reached across the table. She held my hand, and she started crying. But something about it didn't feel like regret. It felt like negotiation. The hearing was the next morning. She had less than 24 hours, and she made one final offer. Come home. Not just for dinner. Come home for good. She promised Christmas. birthdays, my niece's graduation. My photograph would go back on the wall. My father would finally acknowledge me. Everything I had wanted for 15 years. All I had to do was be uncertain. She didn't ask me to lie. She was smarter than that. She asked me to say I wasn't sure. Maybe I had been asleep. Maybe I couldn't remember the exact time. Maybe I had misunderstood what I heard. That was all. My sister would keep her future. The injured man would receive an insurance settlement. And I would get my family back. She looked at me. Then she said, "Choose the version where you still have a family." I looked past her. At the photographs, the wall still stopped around the year I turned 20. I realized something. I could have my family back, but only if I disappeared again. Only if I became the version of me they preferred. Only if I became quiet again. Only if I allowed someone else's story to replace the truth. I squeezed my mother's hand. Then I said, "Mom, I've spent 15 years being the person you needed me to be." She looked at me. "Tomorrow, I'm going to be exact." Then I added, "I love you," and I left. The courthouse was an old stone building. 9 steps led to the entrance. There were reporters waiting outside. 2 television cameras, several microphones. By then, they knew. The headline that morning had my name in it, and beside my name was the word, "Judge." A reporter stepped toward me. "Do you have anything to say about your sister?" "No comment." "Are you appearing here as a judge?" "I'm here as a witness." Another question. "Do you have anything to say about your family?" "No comment." Then I walked inside. I didn't stop. I didn't give them a quote. I didn't give them a dramatic speech. That was deliberate, because the courtroom was where the truth needed to happen, not outside it. Inside, the room smelled old. The seats were wooden. A ceiling fan clicked every time it turned. The injured man was sitting in the front row. He had a cane beside him. His wife sat next to him. My sister was at the defense table. My mother was behind her. My father was there too. I was sworn in, and I began. I told the story in order. The keys, the bowl, the party, the wine, the campaign signs, the bedroom, the garage, the voices, the empty key bowl, the morning news, the damaged SUV, the lawyer already waiting, the confession already typed. The word panicked, the later version that changed it to confused. I didn't add drama. I didn't insult anyone. I simply described what happened. Then the forensic technician testified. She explained how the evidence had been collected, how it had been sealed, how it had been documented, how it had been transferred. The manufacturer's vehicle data matched the independently collected evidence. The phone connection, the timing, the vehicle information, all of it lined up. Then my sister's attorney stood. He was good. Very good. He asked why my own family didn't know I was a federal judge. He made the question sound almost ridiculous. How could a family not know? He repeated it. The room reacted. I waited. Then, I answered, because I helped them not know. The room became quiet. I continued. For 15 years, I let them believe the version of me they had created. I looked at the attorney. That was my mistake. He asked me to explain. I did. I thought staying quiet was easier than correcting them. Then I said, "But I am finished paying for that." Behind him, my sister started whispering to her attorney. The attorney told her to stop. She didn't. She stood. Her attorney tried to make her sit. She refused. Then she started talking. She said the situation had been misunderstood. She said there was context. She said the family had been under pressure. She started using the word narrative. Inside a courtroom, the judge stopped her. She kept going. She said people like my family were judged differently. Then she said something that changed the room. She said, "It was one mistake." She looked toward me. "People like me get to make mistakes. I don't." Nobody moved. My sister had finally said what my father had been thinking from the beginning. She believed her future mattered more than mine. The judge looked at her. Then the hearing continued. The judge found probable cause. The case was bound over for trial. Conditions were changed. Her passport was surrendered. Additional subpoenas were issued, and the room slowly emptied. I sat there, quietly, thinking about that question she had asked me weeks earlier. Who would believe you? The answer was finally clear. The evidence would, the records would, the witnesses would, and eventually, the truth would. My sister later accepted a plea. She pleaded guilty to felony leaving the scene of an accident involving serious injury. She received jail time, probation, restitution. Her driver's license was suspended. She withdrew from the election. Her campaign ended. The attorney who helped prepare my false statement came under investigation. The county prosecutor eventually stepped away from the case. My parents were not charged. That part hurt, because I wanted everything to be equal. I wanted every person who had helped to pay the same price. But courts don't work that way. A courtroom is a narrow instrument. It decides what can be proven. Not everything that deserves punishment, and I had to learn to accept that. Because by then, something more important had already happened. My life had changed, not because my family had apologized. They hadn't, not because my father finally understood me. He didn't. Not because the photographs went back on the wall. They didn't. Something else had happened. I had stopped asking them to see me. That was the real victory. Not making them sorry. Not making them afraid. Not making them understand. Just refusing to disappear for them again. My sister took the plea several months later. She received 60 days in county jail, 3 years of probation, restitution, and a suspended driver's license. Her political career ended. The statement she released was less than 2 minutes long. She thanked her supporters. She said she was sorry. Then she disappeared from public life. Martin, the family attorney, faced an investigation by the state bar. The problem wasn't simply that he represented my family. It was that he had helped prepare a statement for someone who had not been represented independently. The county prosecutor announced that he wouldn't seek another term. My parents were never criminally charged. That was difficult for me. For weeks, I kept thinking about it. Then I realized something. I had spent too much of my life waiting for the legal system to give me emotional justice. It couldn't. That wasn't its job. The court could decide whether someone broke the law. It couldn't give me the childhood I should have had. It couldn't make my father proud. It couldn't make my mother tell me she was sorry. It couldn't give me back 15 years. But there was one thing it did give me. A clean record, my name, and the freedom to stop hiding. The injured man recovered slowly. He went back to work at the diner. Not full-time, a few hours at a time. They put a stool behind the counter so he could sit when his leg hurt. His wife settled the civil case with the insurance company. They bought the transmission they had been saving for. Then they bought a small greenhouse. I still visit sometimes. Whenever I'm in the area, I stop by. He always lets me buy coffee. Then he charges me for the pie. I don't argue. There is a picture in my chambers now, not of my family, not of my parents. It's a photograph of him standing outside the diner. He's wearing an apron. He has a cane in one hand, and his other hand is on my shoulder. That photograph means more to me than any family portrait ever did. Then, one afternoon, I got a text from my niece. She said her mother didn't want her talking to me, but she still wanted to know what happened. She asked me for the truth. I sat there for a long time. Then I told her everything. But I didn't turn her parents into monsters, and I didn't pretend they were innocent. I explained it in the simplest way I could. Her mother made a terrible decision. Her grandparents protected that decision, and I refused to take the blame for something I didn't do. She wrote back, "Thank you for telling me straight." Then she said something I'll never forget. Nobody ever tells me the straight version. I stared at that message, because that was my family. We didn't tell the truth. We told versions. Versions that made people comfortable. Versions that protected reputations. Versions that kept the family looking good. I had spent 15 years living inside someone else's version of me, and I was finally done. A few weeks later, a new clerk started working in my chambers. She was young, nervous, very serious about making coffee. One afternoon, she asked me if I had family nearby. The old me would have smiled and said no. The old me would have let the conversation move on. Instead, I told her the truth. No. She looked at me. My family lives about 6 hours away. I paused. We're not in contact. She didn't know what to say. So I explained. My sister injured a man with my vehicle. My parents wanted me to take responsibility. I refused. I testified. The clerk looked uncomfortable. I smiled. It's okay. People don't always know what to say when someone tells them the truth. They don't have to. The important part is that I no longer needed to protect everyone from it. My mother was right about one thing. Families do run on stories. They always have. But I've learned the difference between a story and a lie. A story can help you understand your life. A lie asks you to disappear inside it. For years, my family loved the version of me that asked for nothing. The quiet daughter. The unsuccessful daughter. The daughter who stayed away. The daughter who didn't correct anyone. The daughter who would sacrifice herself if it kept everyone else comfortable. That person was useful to them. But she wasn't me. And the day I stopped pretending to be her was the day my real life began. There are people who spend years being underestimated. They get labeled early. The difficult one. The unsuccessful one. The quiet one. The one who never quite measured up. And eventually, those labels become so familiar that you stop fighting them. You start living inside them. That was what happened to me. I didn't just allow my family to underestimate me. I helped them do it. I stopped correcting them. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped sharing the things I was proud of. I thought I was protecting my peace. But sometimes silence doesn't protect your peace. Sometimes it simply teaches other people that they are allowed to define you. The hardest part wasn't losing my family. The hardest part was realizing that I had been helping them lose me for years. Every time I stayed silent. Every time I laughed at the courthouse joke. Every time I avoided correcting my father's version of my life. Every time I told myself it didn't matter, it mattered. Not because I needed their approval, but because I had slowly learned to believe the same version of myself they believed. That I was less important, less successful, less worthy of being protected. The accident forced me to look at that. My family didn't suddenly become cruel. They had been telling me who they thought I was for years. I just finally listened. And once I heard it clearly, I couldn't unhear it. My father believed my sister's future was worth protecting. My mother believed I could be sacrificed. My sister believed I would eventually give in. The lawyer believed I would sign. They all believed the same thing. That I would choose belonging over truth. They were wrong. But I don't hate them. That's something people sometimes expect. They expect the ending of a story like this to be revenge. They want the father to beg. The mother to collapse. The sister to cry. They want the family to understand what they lost. That didn't happen. Real life is usually less satisfying than that. My father still lives in the same house. My mother still keeps family photographs. My sister still has her own life. The world didn't stop because I finally told the truth. It kept moving. That was actually the most important lesson. You don't always get a dramatic ending. Sometimes you simply get your life back. You wake up one morning and realize you're no longer waiting for an apology. You're no longer checking your phone. You're no longer wondering whether someone finally understands. You're simply living. That's what happened to me. I started taking long walks again. I started accepting invitations I used to avoid. I stopped hiding my work. I stopped pretending I was embarrassed by what I had accomplished. Not because I needed anyone to admire me, but because I had finally stopped being ashamed of being more than they expected. And there was something else. I stopped explaining why I didn't come home. People would ask. I'd give them the truth. We aren't close. That was enough. I didn't need a 20-minute explanation. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to prove that I was the victim. The facts were enough. And sometimes that's the most peaceful place you can reach. When you no longer need anyone else to agree with your version of what happened. My niece eventually graduated. I wasn't there. That hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. There are losses you don't fix by being right. You simply learn to carry them. But she still texts me sometimes. And when she does, I answer honestly. I don't poison her against her parents. I don't ask her to choose sides. I don't tell her what to think. I just tell her the truth when she asks. Because she deserves something different. She deserves a family where truth isn't treated like a threat. And maybe one day she'll build that kind of family herself. The injured man still works at the diner. A few hours at a time. His stool is still behind the counter. The greenhouse sits behind his house. His wife grows tomatoes in it. Sometimes I stop by. He'll see me walk through the door and say, "Coffee?" I say yes. Then he'll point toward the pie. I say no. He says, "Too late." And he puts a slice on the plate anyway. It's a small thing, but that's what peace looks like sometimes. Not a grand apology, not a perfect ending. Just sitting across from someone who knows the truth and doesn't need you to become smaller because of it. I keep that photograph in my chambers. An old man in an apron, a cane, his hand on my shoulder. It sits where my family photograph could have been. And sometimes people ask who he is. I tell them, someone who reminded me what mattered. That's enough. Because after everything, I don't want my life to be about the family that tried to blame me. I don't want my story to be about my sister. I don't want to spend the rest of my life proving my father wrong. I want it to be about the day I finally stopped measuring my worth by the people who refused to see it. That is the part I want you to remember. If your family has already decided who you are, you don't have to spend your life arguing with them. You don't have to convince them. You don't have to perform success for them. You don't have to become louder. You don't even have to explain yourself. Sometimes you simply stop cooperating with the version of you they created. And that's enough. Because the moment you stop performing for people who only love the convenient version of you, something changes. You become free. Not immediately, not perfectly, but slowly. You start making decisions for yourself. You start telling the truth. You start choosing people who don't need you to disappear, so they can feel comfortable. And one day you look back and realize something. The person you thought you lost was never really gone. She was just waiting for permission to come back. For years, my family loved the version of me that asked for nothing. The quiet daughter, the daughter who stayed away, the daughter who didn't correct anyone, the daughter who would sacrifice herself if it kept everyone else comfortable. That person was useful to them, but she wasn't me. And the day I stopped pretending to be her was the day my real life began. So if someone in your life has already decided who you are, if they've filed you away as the disappointment, the failure, the quiet one, the one who will always give in, remember this. You don't have to spend your entire life proving their version of you wrong. You can simply stop living by it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say isn't a speech. It isn't revenge. It isn't even goodbye. Sometimes it's just no. That's what I said. One word. No. And that word cost me my family. But it gave me back my life, my name, my work, my peace, and, finally, myself. I still think about that morning sometimes. The kitchen island, the typed confession, the pen waiting beside it, my mother's hands on my shoulders, my father's voice telling me I had nothing to lose, and my sister asking, who would believe you? I know the answer now. The records believed me. The evidence believed me. The witnesses believed me. And eventually I believed myself. That's the part that matters most. Because sometimes the people who hurt you are the same people who taught you to doubt your own memory. They tell you what happened. They tell you what you meant. They tell you who you are. And if you hear it long enough, you start repeating it to yourself. I stopped. That was the real confession, not the one they typed for me. The one I finally made to myself. I was not the family failure. I was not the useless daughter. I was not someone with nothing to lose. I was a person who had built a life they never bothered to learn about, and I deserved to keep it. So if you're listening to this and you recognize yourself somewhere in it, I hope you remember one thing. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. Not at Thanksgiving, not at Christmas, not for another birthday, not ever. You can love people and still tell the truth. You can forgive people and still leave. You can miss your family and still know that going back would cost too much. And you can lose people without losing yourself. Sometimes the door closing behind you is not the end of your life. Sometimes it's the first quiet moment when you finally get to hear your own voice. Mine started with one word, no. And after 15 years of being invisible, that word was enough. That's my story. One empty key bowl, one damaged vehicle, one sealed evidence bag, and one signature I refused to give. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you in the next story.